Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be speaking here today with my colleagues, Eric and Amy. But before I begin, I want to thank Julie Jones, who's the curator in charge of the arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, for involving me in so much of the planning and implementation stages of the Oceanic Gallery construction and reinstallation. I want to emphasize here that embedded throughout this project, there are many practical and aesthetic details in the overall concept, object placement and orientation, and case design, to name but a few examples, that owe their beauty and success to Julie's practiced eye and experience with this space and these objects. And as Eric has already pointed out, at any given time, several of the multitudes of galleries that make up the Metropolitan Museum of Art are in a state of change. Keeping the museum fresh in the interpretation of the artworks up to the most recent scholarly and preservation advancements demands that gallery spaces be reinterpreted every few decades. Here you are looking at before and after views of the Melanesian Oceanic Gallery, just pretty much what Eric's shown you already. But before this transition can take place, the entire gallery has to be deinstalled and all the objects within the space must be stored in a way that protects them, yet allows the conservators access for examination, possible treatment, and preparation for reinstallation. It might be a bit hard to imagine from these photos that the gallery is filled with objects, most of them hard, heavy, and a bit fragile. The camera lens distorts the feeling of space in both these images, and the space surrounding these objects is not quite as vast as you might seem to think that it is here. The canoe of the title appears as a little speck right there in the far end of the gallery in both images. And also note the height markers. You saw them in Eric's images as well on the new ceiling. The lower number, 23 feet, is the approximate height of our new ceiling. And the upper number is more or less the subfloor of the recently reopened 19th century galleries on the second floor of the Rockefeller wing, as you can see in this elevation. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I think I'm not wading out of my depth by pointing out the position of the support for the weight of the structure. And what you see right here, this is the new truss, and this blank space is the old truss. It's worth noting that although the beams are pinned into the curtain wall, which you see here, these are the beams, the bulk of the weight is supported through cantilevering out from the truss. As my husband accurately noted, a feat of architectural daring do. This truss weighs around 30 tons, I believe, and it's my understanding that technology, engineering skill, and ironworkers used for this phase of the construction has some relationship to that used in assembling offshore oil rigs. The architectural firm Kevin Roach, John Dinkeloo and Associates, and construction firm R.C. Dolner were coordinated by the Metropolitan's construction department headed by Nick Cameron to develop and implement this project. Aside from the engineering complexities and the high profile of the site, there was also concern for public safety and protection of the artworks. To my knowledge, there was never any consideration of closing off anything more than the adjacent spaces. As you can see from this cross-section, the work of installing the truss would be performed within the envelope of the wing, where both climate control and protection of the artworks, museum personnel, and the public are critical. So here's the new wing, and for the installation, all the art was deinstalled here, but the Rockefeller personnel were still here, and we heard a lot of noise and a lot of dust. It was a very interesting time for all of us. Okay. In order to bring in a truss, a section of the glass curtain wall, that's this here, was dismantled, tracks were laid to the mezzanine fascia wall, that's what you see here, and the truss was brought in 3 sections to be assembled in situ and raised on jacks that were monitored by lasers to make sure they were operating in tandem. AAOA's former collections manager, Halit Zwick, and I stood on the grassy hill outside the window one breezy fall day and watched the truss slowly rise up the wall. So it was rose from the floor right up to this point you see here. The topping off ceremony occurred on November 12, 2004. The brilliant engineering was evident even to amateurs like us. But I'm getting ahead of myself because this phase of the project came much later. And please note right here, the lower ceiling of the gallery is what Eric was talking about, you could see in the model, at around 11 feet. This long gallery would not immediately be affected by the installation of the truss, and the space proved to be crucial for this project. The proposed gallery demolition is one of many in-house renderings you are seeing today, all of which were created by one of the Met's talented designers, up here, Dan Kershaw. Dan was assigned to be designer for the wing, and the department worked closely with him through all phases of this project. And he's the most cheerful person you will ever want to meet, I must say, always really up for any idea, no matter how harebrained it may sound at the beginning. The brown dotted lines indicate platforms, walls, and caseworks, all of which were constructed as part of the original Roche Dinkeloo 1981 installation. So you see all this. And then these structures were built using structural steel with plywood and formica-covered stud walls and lots of safety glass, as you saw in those pictures. These are huge, deep cases. All were securely fastened to the concrete slabs. The black outlines, these ones here, and some small things around the perimeter, indicate open platforms and freestanding cases, all of which were movable. Every one of these structures, black and brown, were scheduled to be demolished and removed. However, before this phase could commence, there were a few details that had to be worked out. The first challenge, already noted, would be where to store all the art currently on view in the Pacific and native North American galleries, as well as a large number of additional works that were not on view, but which were stored in spaces behind the exhibition cases. So what you can't see here, what's always invisible, is all the spaces that look like practically nothing because the scale is so big, and over here as well, where we had a lot of art stored. These storage spaces, all of which were filled with objects from the three cultural spheres, Oceania, Africa, and the Americas, would also be lost through demolition. Everything would need temporary storage space. Where would we find such a space within the museum, as it was deemed too costly to create and ship these works off-site for the duration of the construction phase of this project? After much discussion among AAOA staff, our construction staff, the architects, and engineers, it was determined that the art would be stored within the Pacific galleries, in the long and proportionally narrow space below the mezzanine, and just beyond the area where I showed you before, so this is the elevation, and here's the plan view. Just beyond the area where the truss was to be installed. From the beginning, everyone realized that this former gallery would have to be made secure, supplied with electricity, ventilation, and computer lines, and sealed against dusts and pests. The engineer assured us that construction noise and vibrations would be minimal. The second challenge was the deinstallation of all the art. Of course, that task included the aforementioned 50-foot canoe, along with approximately 1,200 other artworks, both large and small. This part of the process, the planning for the deinstallation and storage, began in late fall 2003, approximately 9 months in advance of the empty space being turned over to the construction team for the installation of the truss. And we do get these schedules, and their contracts are written and money is changing, so we know we have to move according to the plan. Recalling my experience about a decade earlier working with the former head of textile conservation, Nobuko Kajitani, and conservator Elena Phipps on the development of the Textile Conservation Laboratory in the Rati Textile Center, I knew it would be critical to have accurate measurements of all the large objects involved in the move. Unwilling to rely on database measurements, over 350 large objects were measured in 3 dimensions, and weight estimates and mounts were also recorded. After completing that somewhat daunting task, all our data was entered into the department's database. Lists sorted for us by size categories were generated. On the right, you see just a summary of these files put together by the Victoria Southwell, who ran all these lists with photographs and divvied them up in various different ways so we could really get a handle on what it was we had to store, because we had to estimate exactly what kind of storage space we were going to build here, how big, how long, how many shelves, et cetera, et cetera. The categories helped us to do, oh, I said that. Once the planning phase had ended, the next phase, wing deinstallation, began. Step one was to empty out the gallery space under the mezzanine so that the storeroom could be built. And as you can see, this gallery in these two pictures, and as Eric has shown you, is filled with art and with heavy casework. And this casework and all of this are I-beamed into the slab above it. It's really built for the ages. A secure area is the first goal. So what we needed was a swing space. We had to deinstall all that stuff, and we had to put that stuff somewhere. A secure area is the first goal in creating the swing space. All the entrances to the Rockefeller wing were tidily sealed off and painted to minimize distraction in the remaining open spaces for Africa and the Americas art. So because all of this, you know, was open gallery space, and people weren't supposed to know what was happening behind the closed-off areas. Access was restricted to necessary staff. The first batch of wide-span 4x8-inch shelving with 4x8-foot shelving with movable shelves was brought into position along with tables, chairs, lamps, and computer equipment. The large platform that you see here would also be conscripted to hold art objects. Large quantities of archival foam, sturdy boards, papers, and plastic were ordered. And here you have two images. Well, this one's flipped. It was just taken shooting this way and this way. How the swing space worked. And here's the curtain wall. Things that were gigantic were left installed to the last minute. Everything's lined up. There's the canoe. It wasn't moved. We just worked around it. Things stacked all the Malagon figures off the platforms. In the large project, it is critical to be able to locate every and any object, and collections manager Halit Zwick continued to oversee this task through December 2006, when that job was taken on by Rebecca Fifield, who continues in the position of collections manager for AAOA. Deinstalling and storing over 1,200 objects in approximately a 4-month period required a team of conservators and assistants to dismantle mounts and supports, briefly condition check, and prepare for storage these objects. Staff object conservator Ellen Howe was involved throughout this project. Ellen recommended for the first part of this deinstallation that Leslie Gatt, a New York City-based conservator in private practice, be contracted to oversee the installation. Ellen, who, like myself, was involved in the 1981 installation, worked closely with Leslie during this time. Leslie was also ably assisted by assistant conservators Amy Jones and Beth Edelstein. Because of the compressed time frame, the professional staff was augmented by a series of interns, conservation students, and volunteers. And this deinstallation team included Sarah Heineman, Laura Lipsey, Carolina Bermudez, Victoria Binder, and Leslie Boyer, and some of whom you see here deinstalling the Cuomo ceiling on this very large and heavy structure to hold these things which weigh ounces. And here they are on the floor, every single one of them tracked. All this paperwork that you see, it has to follow the object, otherwise we don't know where things are. Once all the art had been moved from under the mezzanine galleries, the area below the fascia wall, so here's the fascia wall right there, so this is now all emptied out, was tented with double rows of plastic and also a solid temporary framing wherever demolition was scheduled to happen. So you can see all this, the plastic, and this is where some of the casework came out beyond the fascia wall. The museum's engineering department worked with the construction crews to ensure that most of the dust would be collected or pulled away from gallery spaces. But just in case of an equipment malfunction, everything in this case, art, the storage, shelving, and surfaces used for exam, were covered against possible invasion of gray construction dust, the unwelcome byproduct of every demolition. Because we couldn't build any walls or other protective structures over this large area, all was covered with 2 layers of plastic. So beyond this area is where all the art is. Should dust settle everywhere, it would be too time-consuming to attempt a vacuum cleanup of all these surfaces. So if we need to, if an accident happens, we carefully gather up the outer layer of plastic, and should some dust escape, it settles on the second layer instead of on the art. Once the case demolition was finished and all the debris removed, the process of building the temporary structure within the gallery space began. Again, double layers of plastic went up in the area around the fascia wall, but this side, time to protect one side against the other. We stayed busy as well, because we had to lay out a shelving elevation that would accommodate all the large, heavy, and unusually shaped objects with little room to spare. Calculating the storage spaces for small and medium-sized objects is relatively straightforward, but making room for around 200 large, often heavy, unusually fragile, and oddly shaped work that included the 50-foot canoe, several heavy slit gongs, a soul ship, a second dugout canoe, 9 beach poles, many of which were carved from tree trunks with at least one buttress root attached. Well, all of that was a bit more challenging. And here you can see what you see down here. It looks like these big sausages. This is the negative pressure system, basically a large vacuum, to try to keep all the demo work inside there, the dust. All the long, large objects were stored along the side walls of the temporary storeroom on cantilevered shelving. With no front supports, long objects could be easily laid in place. It would also be easy for conservation staff to more thoroughly examine and even surface clean some of these objects during the time they were stored. As with all other phases of the construction project, subcontractors were scheduled to install the shelving within a narrow window of time. Calling them back to make shelving adjustments would add unnecessary cost to our budget. We had to be sure that the spacing between the shelves was adjusted to accommodate all the objects, and in our space there was no extra room for miscalculations. One very low-tech way to accomplish this task was to make scale elevation. The shelving was installed in sections, and this is sort of like what you saw in the model, only a little more primitive. The shelving was installed in sections, the longest of which was over 80 feet. And not wanting to paste dozens of sheets together, our construction office printed out for us a series of uprights, which you see here they are, spaced 4 feet on center to the scale of 1 inch equals 1 foot, to which we would add post-it shelving for ease of adjusting. Amy and Beth, assisted by their team, made 2-scale renderings with a tiny image and the dimensions on each, as you can see here. They were placed onto the shelving and arranged and rearranged till we could fit everything into the space we were given. These large-scale plans were then, because these are big, this is like 24 inches. These large-scale plans were then used by the shelving installers to secure the 4-foot by 4-foot shelves onto continuous rows of varying heights. And here you can see the afterwards with the different shelvings and all the tightly fitted together, stacked up objects. Here you have a space for one of those buttress roots for a beach pole. Because construction dust continued to be a problem, the shelving had plastic covers which would be rolled back when working on or removing an object during this time. Eventually, the dust problem was minimized. Individual objects with particularly vulnerable surfaces were usually covered with archival tissue secured with cotton tapes. Well, now it was time to move all the rest of the big objects into the temporary storeroom. For these works of art, the Metropolitan has an excellent in-house team of riggers who are always busy moving objects throughout the museum. Some advanced planning was necessary to make sure the riggers could be available to move our objects at the designated time, as dictated by the construction schedule. On the right, Ellen, and there's just a bit of Eric, are watching the slit gun swing off its base and about to be transferred to dollies for moving into the storeroom. On the left, the middle shop, also an in-house trade, here they are up there, are unfastening the metal supports for the beach poles while one of the riggers and our former departmental technician await the next step. During this time, the temporary storeroom is also being assembled and outfitted in as dust-free a manner as possible. And you can see that there's always barriers. We've had all kinds of barriers to try to keep the dust off the art. And finally, you've already seen this slide, we get to the 50-foot canoe. It too is removed from its supports and wheeled into the temporary storeroom. On the left, the canoe is still in the gallery and is about to be lowered from the wooden platform, that's right here, on which it had rested for 24 or more years. It was rolled into the storeroom, and to enable this to happen, the final 20 feet of the exterior wall of the storeroom, here's the fascia wall right here. Ooh, I'm losing my light. Was left unbuilt to allow for the wide turning radius of this object. You can imagine swinging a 50-foot canoe around is a big deal. A conservation workspace was also created. Now I'm reminding you exactly where we are again. As you recall seeing it, it had all those, the ceiling in it and all those storage cases completely gone, new lighting attached, new ventilation, but more electric, blah, 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 all fitted out for conservators and art. A conservation workspace was created, right here you see it, within this storage space to accommodate the contract conservators, Amy and Beth. In the beginning of 2005, Lindsley Boyer joined the contract staff and assisted in the documentation, cleaning, and treatment of objects. In both these slides, you can see the cantilevered shelving along both walls. And the wide-span shelving that was used in the outside gallery was disassembled and augmented to accommodate the 300 or so chroma ceiling panels. It became a tight but very serviceable space for storage and for work. And here we have another close-up view of the chroma ceiling panels, all of which needed surface cleaning and many of which needed further treatment. Again, the tracking and other location information was entered into the department's database. Once these things were in here, everything, Becky and Halit had to recheck to make sure we knew where everything was. The somewhat wide spaces, because the images, this is 8 inches, it looks like gigantic, so I don't want people to think, my goodness, all this extra space. These are very curvilinear, undulating shapes, and when you have to put your hand in there and 2 people and carefully lift it out, you've got to have a little bit of swing space so you're not knocking the panel against the steel surfaces. So finally, in midsummer of 2004, a completely empty gallery was presented to the contractors, and the skillful but dirty work of installing the truss began. So here's our storeroom, and for a while we had this secret entrance, but believe me, this got locked off the minute that the ironworkers took over the space. And you can see, though, how close it is. Here's the truss is going to be brought in and raised right up in front of this wall. While the engineering work was going on in this space and the contract conservators were busy with the objects inside the temporary storeroom, the work of the department didn't stop. That year, both the Colonial Andes and Echoing Images exhibitions took place. Each subsequent year welcomed another AAOA exhibition or two, but the design of the new Pacific Gallery casework and the eventual reinstallation of these objects was now beginning. Meetings including the curators, conservators, and the designers were ongoing. I want to show you, these are 2 great images. An active construction site can be dangerous. As the project moved along and as we needed access to this space, we began to rely on the museum's project manager for the Pacific Gallery construction, Luisa Herrera. And I really was hoping that somewhere in the hundreds of photos of this project, we would have an image of Luisa, hard hat on her head, escorting us around the gallery, but no luck. These are, however, photos taken by Luisa to document this part of the project, and it provides a glimpse of all the work that needs to take place before casework, let alone installation of objects, can begin. So here's the truss. The fireproofing's been sprayed on, which is why it all looks this kind of beige color. And here are the beams. And these pictures always have a keystoning look. That's the metal pan that's holding the concrete slab above it. And here's another view. My battery's dying. That shows the all cleaned up fireproofing. The next load of subcontractors come in. These are the guys that are going to be putting in all the wiring and all the lighting, the sprinkler system, and of course the sheetrockers. In the meantime, throughout this time, the design of the gallery spaces are being refined. This is a plan view of one of the early visions for the exhibition installation. And I think they all say Dan Kershaw, so you know how busy Dan has been this whole time. It might be a bit confusing, this picture, because it's superimposed on the old platform. So all the brown and marks you see are where the old things are, and the superimposed new images on top of it. Eric has already discussed the plan for allotting space to the various cultural regions, including in the corner a space for native North American arts. But there was also concern for reconstituting the equivalent of the several large storage spaces that were destroyed during the demolition. These had to be rebuilt, and it was planned that these new spaces would be finished to better protect the artifacts within them. Marked here are some of the exhibition cases on Dan's plan that were to be redesigned in order to create storage spaces for the objects that would not be put back onto display. We all worked together on this project. Dan created a sleek design that both Julie and Eric would approve, while adding some well-functioning storage spaces for the conservators and collections managers. And in this later rendering, note how the casework has all been same casework pretty much. The Native North American Art Gallery got a bit bigger, and especially I've lost in the far, which is the west end of the gallery, you see quite a large casework there. The design is quite ingenious because discrete gallery spaces are created and the artworks on display, rather than the cases that contain them, are highly visible. But within these cases, we were able to create spaces that were in every way superior to the old storage spaces, along with specifying archival materials to be used as much as possible in their construction. We added finished ceilings and with enclosed recessed lighting to help protect works from dust. The doors were gasketed, floors and walls were finished. Some of the shelving, and in order not to try to save money, some of the shelving used for the object stories during the construction phase was recycled into these spaces. But one of the best details from a storage point of view was the addition of a space that would open onto the mezzanine level that was built onto the exhibition at the case at the west side of the gallery, and that's what I'm trying to point out to you, but it's at the far west end. Curator in charge Julie Jones allowed us to come out from the west wall the depth of one bay, and you can see the bays on the side. These are the bays. In order to create this large space. And ideas usually start out in a really low-tech manner. Above you see the field drawing, which is a plan view of the compact storage cases on the mezzanine level above the gallery casework. So this is now that plan, the upper level, right, connecting onto our office area so we can access it from the offices. It was our intention to use this new space as well as the space below it to store some of the objects which would eventually have to be removed from the temporary storage space. And here are two details of the new compact storage. 4x8 wide-span storage was installed on carriages. And at this point, the deconstruction schedule for the temporary storeroom demanded that we move all the objects from this space by the end of 2006, so that all that new case construction that you saw in the previous slide could begin. Therefore, the Cuomo ceiling panels and many other objects from the temporary storeroom were moved into compact storage. Since we didn't have nearly as much space in this new storeroom, the conservators and collections manager discussed the situation among themselves and decided we would have to stack the panels temporarily. And you can see how they're all stacked up. And while this isn't the best in terms of how we think about objects, we felt we could accept it for this short amount of time. But even using spaces that we found in addition to this, we still didn't have enough sufficient space to store all the art that was in that temporary storeroom. So once again, we were being asked to move more than 1,200 objects. And even though new casework in the west end of the gallery and the compact storage would be finished, it would not be large enough, and we'd have to build a second storeroom. So the conservation staff worked together to design a temporary storage space, affectionately known as the hut, partly to minimize the impact of the fact that we were asking again for a storage space almost as large as the first. Here you can see the first field drawing for the hut, but it was determined by everyone that the final version up here would have to be considerably bigger. All the large objects which had to be stored horizontally, for example, the canoe, slit gongs, beach poles, soul ship, etc., were moved into this space. Some of the vertically stored objects were brought into the hut, others were spread out among the different smaller storage areas. As the casework was finished, objects from the huts were installed in the gallery where you see them today. And this slide is a good spot to let Amy Jones pick up the story. Thank you. The installation of the objects was getting underway. And so before I go away from this, I just want to point out that I did go back up to my workspace and start working on a variety of textile, tapa, and fiber objects from both Eric's area and Native American costumes and textiles and other three-dimensional objects from Julie's area. So the story continues.